Rape, murder, and shattered dreams. In recent days, from Sierra Leone to South Africa, stories of sexual violence against women and girls are dominating the news headlines and leading to urgent calls for reform and an end to a culture of rape. Coming up, we'll take you to Sierra Leone for the very latest on the investigation into the rape and murder of 5-year-old Khadija Sakor. Plus, a conversation with two gender rights activists about how their respective countries, Ghana and South Africa, are battling persistent gender-based violence. All that, plus your comments and questions, are just ahead. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. If you were with me yesterday, you'll know that we dedicated the entire show to the rape and murder of 5-year-old Khadija Sakor, a horrific crime that took place in Freetown, Sierra Leone, a few days ago. One of the people we featured on the show was Khadija's father, Abubakar Congolese Sakor, and he shared his pain and his hopes for justice for his little girl and the hope that she will be a spark for change in that country. At the same time, we've also been reaching out to the little girl's mother, Binta, to get her on the show so that she can share her side of the story, that she can just give us some more insight into this horrible tragedy. As you'd expect, this is an incredibly difficult time for the mother, and we're told that she's in a hospital in London, which is where she lives. We're told she's in a hospital in London, but we did get a statement, a message from Binta's sister, Miriam, with an update on how Binta is doing. She gave us permission to share that statement with you, and I want to do that now. The message we got from Miriam reads in part this. She says regarding her sister Binta, the mother of 5-year-old Khadija Sakor, the statement says, her condition is improving and she would love to tell her own side of the story, but not this time. She needs a bit of time. Please let's exercise patience as she's eager to speak to Aisha, as she strongly believes that her message would be passed on. She's heavily pregnant and that's why the doctors are holding her up. So just to recap, we had been trying to get Binta on the show because we heard from little Khadija's father and we want to hear from her mother as well. But we will give her all the time, all the space that she needs to in whatever way, I don't want to say come to terms because one can't come to terms with something as horrible as this, but the time she needs to deal with this horrific tragedy. And if she's ever in a space that she wants to speak to me, I will bring that conversation to you and I will share that interview here on Home with Isha Sesay. So just to be clear, we have reached out to both sides. Binta at this time, according to her sister, is, as you'd expect, in a bad way, and she is in hospital in London. She's heavily pregnant. And according to Miriam, that is why the doctors are holding her up. I want to say right at the top, before we go any further, our thoughts and prayers are with the family of Khadija Sakor and everybody touched by this tragedy. We'll continue to cover the story very, very closely. So 5-year-old Khadija Sakor, according to her father, who joined us yesterday, was just eager, desperate even to be a doctor. She was so excited about life, and her father says he was planning to bring her to America so that she could live out her dreams that unfortunately she will never be able to achieve. Right now in Sierra Leone, we know that there are 4 people in custody being held in relation to the rape and murder of Khadija. We know 2 of the individuals, 2 of the suspects, the alleged suspects, her cousin and her aunt. We want to get the latest on the investigation and how this is all playing out in Sierra Leone. Joining me now is a renowned journalist and women's rights activist, Asma James. She joins us now from Freetown. Asma, don't forget to unmute because you know how this tech is. Asma joins us from Freetown now with the very latest. Asma, can you hear me?
Yes, Aisha.
Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Aisha.
I know that this is a story that you have been following very, very closely, right from the very beginning. Let me start by asking you for the latest on the investigation. What are you hearing?
Investigations are still the same. The police is saying they still have the 4 people in their custody. Elisha?
I'm here. If you can hear me, I can hear you.
Yes, Aisha. So investigations are ongoing. Yesterday, the police held a press conference where they gave updates on the status of the case. As it is, they still have 4 people, and they're still trying to take statements or obtain statements from these 4 suspects they have in custody. And so far, that is what the police has been telling us.
You know, you're a gender rights activist focusing on women and girls. You know that the way the police handle cases of rape has been heavily criticized by many in Sierra Leone. But you actually were at the police station, I think a day or so ago, and you witnessed some of this the questioning, some of the investigation as it was playing out. What stood out for you as you watched the process?
Yes, so I was there for almost 5 or so hours when I got the call last night. So I was there. I went to the family house of the late girl, well, the aunt of the late girl, and then we all went to the police station, and I was standing there observing the way situations were. And then I noticed that the police at that time were very, very on top of situation. So I was there, and then the Deputy Inspector General of Police, Madam Tue, came to the police station, and then she had to interview also the FSU, the people in charge of the investigations.
So
and I was there. She was
just so I'm clear. FSU, that's the Family Support Unit.
Family Support Unit, but there was also the Criminal Investigation Department representative at the Family Support Unit, and they were taking statements from 2 of the accused people, one of which they said was a teacher or helped Khadija with her schoolwork, and then another caregiver whom they say when the aunt is not around, she is always there to look after this young girl. And so I was there, I was observing the way the police at that time, they were on top of situation until the head of the deputy IG came, and then until they took them all to the Criminal Investigations Department for further investigations. From what I noticed from the police station where I was, that the police were on top of situation. I was there when they took the boy out of the cell, the alleged brother or relation, and then when they took them to the Criminal Investigations Department. And then the Deputy IG, she spoke to us that you have to trust the police. We are on top of the situation, and we'll make sure we give justice to the case of this little girl. And then from there, I went again to the house, because by then also they were saying that it's another girl who is Khadija's sister, another 8-year-old, was also tampered with. So I was there again at the house, I saw her playing, and then I went home. And yesterday again, I went to the house of the sister again just to see how she's coping. And we are also observing how the police is handling the case. And yesterday again, the police gave updates about the situation.
And just so I'm clear, the alleged rapist in the situation, the family member, I just want to be absolutely clear. He has not confessed, correct? And you said you saw him. Can you give us some sense of his demeanor, how he seemed to you?
As always, because he was being handcuffed, so he was being very. You can see that. I can't exactly explain how he looked, but he looked very, very worried. And until they brought him out from his cell to the main parlor where they had to handcuff him with the aunt or the mom. We don't know. I mean, I cannot tell the relationship between the woman he was arrested with. So, but as always, if you are in trouble, then you look very, very stiff. Very, he was very. His face was so depressed. Okay, is the word. He was very depressed until they took them onto the vehicle to the CID.
Talk to me about the reaction in the country. One thing that I'm struck by is the groundswell of outrage, people taking to the streets in Khadija's name, saying this has to end. Talk to me about some of the protests, some of the scenes that have been playing out in recent days.
Aisha, it's been tough for everybody. I was at the press conference again where the president wanted to update the nation about COVID, and his first reaction was that he was very, very, very angry with the whole situation. And people again, and the amazing thing now is you see the protest that was organized 2 days ago was actually put together by very, very young boys and girls. If I can tell their ages, they are below, say 24, 23, very, very young boys and girls who were leading this protest. Yes, some of our organizations, some of us supported them because we've done this before. Last year, again, there was another case, same thing. The only difference is the young girl is alive and Khadija is dead. But then we did the same thing, and that led to the declaration of the state of emergency. But this one is so unique. Even yesterday, we saw young girls that with placards, they will stand on streets, they will write "Stop Rape," they will we need justice, and it's been all over the city. Men talking about, I saw posts for men. Before they will tell you, let them just go ahead and say what your march or then what after 2 days. But then this one, we're actually seeing young boys and girls. And this is what we want in the conversation now, that the boys or the young people should come on board. The young people should come because they are the ones suffering in all of this. So bringing or coming up, and yesterday, there was another meeting with the United Nations. Again, these young boys, their organization is called Kids Advocacy Network. I must doff my hat to them. Very, very young boys. I mean, they had to organize a meeting, high-level meeting yesterday with the United Nations rep in Sierra Leone and the head of the UN Women in Sierra Leone with women's organization. We held that meeting yesterday, and the United Nations promised they said they support whatever the government or the civil society or these kids, whatever they want to do, they are behind them fully. So bringing these young boys and girls, I must say I doff my hat to them because the whole narrative is changing, and it will change.
You have mentioned government twice in during this conversation, so let me ask you about that specifically. The government had declared a state of emergency. The president himself declared it in February of 2019, setting a number of benchmarks, a certain number of goals to achieve, to transform the system and the way rape cases are handled and prosecuted. I spoke with Sharon Oba, who I know you know well, yesterday, And he said that his feeling was that the government has not devoted the necessary resources and the attention or the urgency to this issue. What's your position?
I think we, as you know, it's the same, because I work closely with Chegno, and we are in the Black Tuesday movement together with other organizations. And there was statements that the president made last year when he declared state of emergency. But again, the president will say these statements. People have to follow up on these issues. And again, in the protest, because the place was so, young people were so hyped on that day. So the Attorney General came down to talk to them, but she could not because of everybody was just shouting for justice. And then she said, okay, she brought in few representatives from the crowd, which I was one of them. And then we went and then we held a meeting with the Attorney General and Minister of Justice. She was very, very willing to support the process now and to change the narrative. There was an issue of task force, which the president spoke about in the last year. And then that issue came up again. And the Attorney General again said she will make sure there is this committee is set up to look into these matters. And even the Minister of Gender also, I engaged him today, this morning. As a matter of fact, she was on radio yesterday, and she said this government, they're supporting the investigation to the fullest. And I held a meeting with her, the gender minister, this morning again, and she was committed. And one thing they are saying also is that to help with the DNA test, because as you know, we all want forensic examination, but it's a whole lot of dynamics in getting the forensic lab, as they are saying now. So the cheapest thing to do now is DNA. And I think the Minister of Gender, Madam Mantie, committed herself that she will follow up on that to make sure if there's anything to be done, they should do the DNA on this particular issue.
Mm-hmm. So again, as somebody who has been working in this space for such a long time, when you look at it, and obviously through your lens as an activist, right now, what is the most significant intervention the government could make in this moment to I guess, move the dial in this moment? Right now, there's a series of things that need to be done, but in terms of immediate next steps, in terms of an immediate intervention, what should that be? What is civil society calling for?
The task force that was supposed to be set up. We have the Survivors Fund, which you and I, we are part of. It's needed urgently, because I remember there's a case of over 50-year-old woman that was also raped by the poor men, and then the woman was at the Aberdeen Women's Center, and those who were close to her had to encourage her to go to a safe home, because it's not easy to leave your community to go to a safe home. But then again, the Minister of Gender said there are safe homes. So we need safe homes as we speak for these victims, and we need the funds now than ever for the survivors. And the issue of silence is also another thing. Yes, people are marching on the streets now because it's a young girl. But I bet you if it was any of us, they would ask you many questions. Why were you there? Why did you go there? So these are the issues that we continue to speak about. We continue to give platform to people, for people to educate, and then continue to talk to people. So yes, we need meeting now. We need the funds for survivors. We need the forensics, yes, or DNA, whichever is cheaper. We need it now, because now, before coming on air, I saw a letter from an attorney, and I'm not sure if I have not verified, but if that letter is true, they are asking for another autopsy. So we only have one pathologist in Sierra Leone. So if they are asking for pathology, another autopsy, who will do this? Do we need an expert to come in? Who will be responsible for this? For that? Now, the mom and the dad, we all know the complication. So the government has to come in now, or NGOs, we have to come in now to say, okay, if we go to that, then some people, different people will have to intervene and bring in an expert to do the autopsy.
Mm. Yeah. It's important that I'm pleased that you made that point, because it's so necessary. That the family dynamic here is so complicated, and that's why we're so keen to get Khadija's mother on the show and get her story here, because we've heard extensively from the father. Let me ask you very quickly on a last point before I let you go. You just touched on the fact that there is this. There is unanimity, there is consensus rather around what happened to Khadija, because she's a child. And if this had happened to, as it does all too often, to a young woman, there would be, the response would be far more, there would be less consensus, let's just put it like that. How do we shift the culture? How do we dismantle the rape culture, the attitudes that really underpin this pervasive violence against women and girls?
It's by engaging the men too. Now we need to bring in the men on board, because as always, when the women talk, when we preach, they say, it's the same thing. By tomorrow, everything will be done with. So now we need to get the men involved, to get the boys involved in the conversation. The culture of silence, Aisha, it's high. We need to let these victims speak freely. We need to. Yeah, there are instances where they will say it happened 20 years ago. 20 years ago, yes, that's if someone you tampered with someone 20 years ago, you have to. It's the issues are many, Aisha, but we are saying, we need to now bring in the men. And the ministry, they have their male engagement policy now, which they are trying to bring on board the men. So to change what we are saying now, more than ever, we need the men now to come in.
There's a long road ahead, but the moment is now to seek to achieve the change that we seek. Asma James, journalist and activist, thank you for giving up so much of your time to join us on the show today. Thank you. So, as you heard there from Asma, the 4 people in custody, we wait to hear more. Also, when we talk about the situation regarding Khadija, it's a very complicated family dynamic. And so, as I've said repeatedly, we heard from the father yesterday on yesterday's show. If you were here with us for yesterday's show, we dedicated the entire 90-minute show to Khadija Sakor. We also heard from her father extensively. We are, when the time is right, when her mother Binta feels up to it, and if she so chooses, we of course want to speak to her, but we're thinking about her at this difficult time. We also want to hear from the government, and it's something that we have also been striving for, to get someone from the government to join us on the show. Listen, you heard from Asma there, and if you're watching the show yesterday, you know that, and if you're in Sierra Leone right now, as horrific as this situation is, what happened to Khadija, right now in Freetown, there's a 4-year-old who was raped and is in a hospital struggling with grievous injuries. We know that according to Purposeful, which is an international advocacy organization co-founded by Sharon Obar, who was on the show yesterday, in Sierra Leone, 9 out of 10 girls, according to their statistics, experience some form of gender-based violence in their lifetime. This ranges from rape or sexual assault by penetration to child marriage, female genital mutilation, and all forms of sexual exploitation, including survival sex. 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10 girls. And as you heard from Asma, the raping of a 5-year-old is not a rare occurrence. You also heard us discuss that national emergency that was declared Again, we asked for someone to join us on the show, someone from the government, to react to what happened to Khadija and to discuss their efforts to fight this, to bring about the reform that is needed, to bring about structural reform to the way police and courts are handling these cases. We have been unsuccessful in that effort. We reached out to the Minister of Gender and Children's Affairs, the Honourable Manti Tarawale, and she wasn't able to join us yesterday. She told us that she already had a packed schedule. We reached out to her again today, said, will you join us? And we have not heard back from her. But I do want to read part of the statement she sent us when she declined the invitation yesterday. So let me read that to you, part of it. This is from the Minister of Gender and Children's Affairs, the Honourable Manti Tarawale. It reads in part, good afternoon from Sierra Leone, and thank you for inviting me. Regrettably, I cannot be with you today due to an important prior commitment. 5-year-old Khadija Sakor's post-mortem examinations results came out last week. I want to take this opportunity once again to register my sincere and deepest condolences to Khadija's family. This is a heinous crime, and we stand with the family to demand justice for Khadija. We applaud the Sierra Leone police for their quick action and the Attorney General, Minister of Justice, for her commitment to a speedy trial. Accordingly, due to ongoing investigations, I will reserve my comments on this specific case. The Honourable Manti Tarawale, the Minister for Gender and Women's Affairs, goes on in the statement that she sent us to talk about the state of emergency that was declared last year by the President and the government's 4 key priorities to combat the sexual violence and rape culture in Sierra Leone. Let me say this. I, again, would not want to make it seem as if members of the government are not speaking. They are speaking in country. But let me also add, at this moment in time, the government cannot over-communicate. We need to hear from our leaders and regularly, and we need to have a robust conversation with our leaders about what they are doing to tackle this issue. So this is a standing invitation to everyone in the administration. You are welcome to join me on the show for us to talk about how we make this a moment of change, and to give us some insight in a deep conversation where you can talk to us about your goals. We can look at some data together. We can talk about the resources being directed to this issue, and we can talk about how you're going to keep women and girls safe in Sierra Leone. So it's a standing invitation. You're welcome. The persistent sexualization and brutalization of women and girls in Sierra Leone is outrageous. I think we can all agree on that, but it would be misleading to leave you with the impression that Sierra Leone is the only one in this class of shame. There are many people in this class of shame across Africa. So let's give you some data as to what we are dealing with, this crisis of violence against women and girls in Africa. This is some of this data, these first stats, and I'll source where they come from with full transparency. This comes to us courtesy of the World Health Organization. In Africa, about 37% of women experience physical or sexual violence. Take note, 37% of women in Africa. In Tanzania, 50% of women have reported being beaten or raped in their home. In Ethiopia, that number jumps to 71%. From the Department of Justice in South Africa, 2,700 women and 1,000 children were murdered by men last year. According to the UN's Global Database on Violence Against Women, to give you some more context on the situation in Sierra Leone, there were 3,252 sexual penetrations recorded in 2019 in Sierra Leone. That is an increase on the previous 2 years, which recorded over 2,700 incidents in 2018 and over 2,500 incidents in 2017. According to the UN, in Ghana, 24% of women experience a form of physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. 14% of girls in schools have reported sexual abuse, and more than half of them have experienced some form of gender-based violence. As shocking as those numbers are, they only tell part of the story, because we all know the reality is women and girls very often do not come forward, are pressured not to come forward to speak about what they have endured. So these numbers are only part of the story. So let's have a deep conversation now about all of this and the state of the continent and its treatment of women and girls. Clearly, from the data I just shared with you, it's everywhere. At least that's the picture coming from the data. Just a few weeks ago, you may have heard that in South Africa, an 8-month pregnant woman was stabbed and left hanging from a tree in Johannesburg. In Nigeria, just about a month ago, a student who had gone to a local church to study because it was noisy in her home, so she went to a church to study, was brutally raped and murdered in the church. The stories are gruesome, and they are all too common. Let's try and get to grips with this. Joining me now, 2 gender rights activists. Ambra Yerenki is in Accra, Ghana, and joining me from Johannesburg, South Africa, we're joined by Nolwazi Tusini. She's also a journalist, in addition to being a gender rights activist. Ladies, welcome.
Thank you, Isha. It's good to see you again.
It's good to see you. It's good to see both of you. Ambra, let me start with you. I know you heard me give that data that pulled the lens back from Sierra Leone and took in the continent. Can you give me your thoughts? I mean, I know this is data you know well. Your thoughts on the scale, the depth, the breadth of this crisis of violence against women and girls in Africa?
Definitely. Well, thank you again for having me. The scale and the depth of this, well, first of all, it's like we discussed in our previous interview. This is, it's become sort of this shadow pandemic to what we're seeing currently globally. There's so many injustices that have come to light, so many emotions around the different inequities all over the world. But I would like to really hit home the idea that this is not something that's new. This is not something that violence against women and girls is not something that, yes, it's much more prevalent, and it's becoming much more to the front lines and to the front scene, as a result of us being at home and being much more attuned to social media and and the emotions that we're feeling around injustices of all types. But this is something that has been prevalent specifically in Ghana for many, many years, many years. It's part of our culture. It's ingrained in our day-to-day interactions. Women and girls have been marginalized in all parts of our society. We've been abused in so many different ways, whether it comes down to physical abuse, emotional abuse, monetary abuse. There's so many different types of violence against women and girls that has been perpetuated against us within this community that, we're so grateful that now we have this attention. But the breadth and the depth of the situation it's dire. It's dire, and it's always been dire. And we really need to come together and really come to some sort of action and to be able to have a united voice and a cohesive voice to protect our key populations.
Yeah. Nowazi, to you, you heard Amber say that it's dire, but it's always been dire. Your take? Amber, Nowazi, we seem to have lost your audio, which I hope is just because you're muted. Can you try again? No, we've lost your audio. Let's work on getting Nowazi's audio back, and we'll keep the conversation going with Amber till then. I know that the team can hear me, so let's try and establish that. Talk to me, and we are working on that right now, Nowazi, so we're working to get you reconnected. To Amber, to stay with you, what underpins it in Ghana? Talk to me about the culture in Ghana that fosters this persistent violence and discrimination.
The culture, it's to be, to be frankly speaking, we do live in a misogynistic culture. It is one that women are considered second class. They are deemed to be second class citizens. And that is in all spheres, whether it comes to political participation, whether it comes to even down to your immediate household, whether it comes to, and that really starts from an early age. We hear stories, or we hear information about other countries in the world. And I really couldn't speak to that, but, places like China, where there's a preference for boys over girls, etc. But in the case of Ghana, and that's much more prevalent, and that's much more, sort of in your face, so to speak. But in the case of Ghana, there are also hidden norms and mores that our culture plays into, and this is perpetuated even within our church, within the traditional systems that we work within. Ghana is we work within a chieftaincy system. That alone has its own very pervasive systemic oppressions. You have chiefs that are, and traditionally queen mothers who are pushed to the side, or who aren't given as much of a voice or decision-making power as their male counterparts, for example. And all of these go to perpetuate these ideologies and these systemic injustices against women. And this starts from a very early age. This starts from, where girls are not maybe given the opportunity to attend school. And this is not what you see maybe in the urban centers, but probably in the more rural settings. So a lot of people would actually disagree with me and say, oh no, there's a lot of equality in Ghana. And, our culture does promote, because we see very strong women. And I could not sit here and negate the work that a lot of women have done and how far they've come in Ghana. You have a lot of women who are sitting within the corporate Ghana have done very well for themselves. But there's still this underlying and this underpinning of women being second-class citizens. You see this a lot even in the political sphere. We don't have as much political participation and representation. And how then are we able to speak to our issues like violence against women, which we know we are sensitive to, and we are, this is relevant to our situation. And so there is this underlying cultural oppression that is continuously perpetrated through our traditional systems, through our churches, through our mosques, through all of these institutions that really deem women as second-class citizens.
Amber, it's so important that you are shedding a light on this, and you are giving the nuances that you can see powerful women in Ghana, but at the same time, there's two things can be true: that you can have powerful women in Ghana and also be having this disease run through society. Nowazi is with us now. We've reestablished connection and have her audio. So Nowazi, welcome. Let me bring you in at this point. I do want to start by just getting your overview. You heard Amber say at the top, this problem is dire and it has been going on for a long time. What are your thoughts when you look across the continent?
absolutely. I think that our continent has a very big problem with patriarchal norms, and the different ways in which they then manifest themselves throughout the continent and in different cultures, and just the understanding of women as inferior, as less than, as subhuman, and children as well. When I read the story of the 5-year-old girl, Khadija, in Sierra Leone, my literally my heart dropped to my stomach, because for me it can't be another child. Just here in South Africa, there was a 3-year-old body that was found here in Johannesburg just last week. And so I think that throughout the continent we have a very big problem with social systems and social hierarchies that place women and children right at the very bottom, and create situations where we can see the kind of violence that we're seeing against women and children.
I mean, it's truly shocking. Amber spoke a little bit about the culture, the chieftaincies that, can reinforce some of this, the patriarchy, the misogyny in South Africa's context. Talk to me about the culture, because I do want to bring this point that I keep hearing repeatedly, and I would really love to hear your thoughts on, which is that the level of violence and the savagery of the violence that we see perpetrated against women and girls in South Africa is somehow linked to the violence of apartheid, and this kind of desensitization that the entire society has faced, this traumatization that the society as a whole is enduring. Give us your thoughts.
Definitely. I think the levels of violence in this country do speak to the history that we have with apartheid in this country. And I think speak to the fact that not enough work was done outside of reconciliation, but just trauma work and healing work. And so that's why in South Africa, we live with really very abnormal levels of violence all throughout, that are not necessarily normalized in the society, because we still do find them shocking, but in some way we're making a life in this abnormality, which is not okay. But I don't know if we can be protesting and be on the streets all the time. I do think that there are certain aspects of our various traditional cultural systems that absolutely do contribute to patriarchy, and therefore the levels of violence that we see women experiencing in this country. I want to speak specifically about a cultural norm called ukuthwala, which really affects young girls, mostly in our rural areas, where they are literally stolen and kidnapped and forced into these child marriages, and a lot of times with the consent of their families. And then that's where you begin to see how the socioeconomic circumstances of this country also feed into the violence, because part of the reason why families essentially sell their girl children into these marriages is also for the financial gain that comes from it, from having one less mouth to feed, and also having the lobola money, the bride price that is paid. And so there are a lot of cultural norms that really speak to the violence that we see against, in particular, women and children in this country, that we definitely do need to be looking at.
Amber, to bring you in and to kind of put side by side with what Nwazi is saying there, particularly in West Africa, or certainly in our region, Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, FGM, female genital mutilation, female genital cutting. What is your view on the role that is playing? I mean, in a country like Sierra Leone, by some statistics, at least 80% of women have been cut. What role is that playing in fostering a culture of violence, fostering ideas about a girl's self-worth, her I guess I don't want to say her utility, but her purpose, in society, and her freedoms? What part does that all play in this kind of broader targeting of women and girls in such way for kind of sexual gratification?
Yeah, it's definitely, it's almost like the beginning of the stripping of a woman's not only dignity, her self-worth, but her identity in itself as a woman. And it begins at such an early age. In Ghana in particular, this harmful practice, as it's considered, FGM, is not as prevalent as it is in other countries in West Africa, but that doesn't negate the instance of it and the harm of it. The idea that you're taking away a female the organ that incites pleasure, that is part of the reproductive system, really is almost, you're stripping the woman of who she is. And really it goes down to this, not only just traditional, but it comes down to, it has religious underpinnings, and it really speaks to letting the community know that this human being is not a human being anymore. This is now an object, and then this is an object that can be sold, that can be treated in any sort of way. And this idea of women as being manipulated in this way it's just so horrendous that I for me sometimes I can't even begin to understand. And in this generation, that we continue to perpetuate violence against women and girls in this way. It really is the beginning of what we know. And I mean, we could talk about this forever, but what we know as women being abused and physically stripped of their dignity.
I want to share some of the comments coming in from viewers now and get your take. And I want to say thank you to everybody who is watching and everyone who's been writing in. And there are a lot of comments, and forgive me for not getting to them till now. There is just a lot to get through, but I do want to read some of them and get you to respond to it. Ambra and Nwazi. Aminata Rajasay says, FGM is the bedrock of the control. We've marked it as tradition, but it is really control. And let me just go on to add a few more comments on the issue of FGM. Ali Mami Kale says, FGM teaches women that she's nothing. And it's again, people saying the rape culture is all over Africa, and just a lot of people again pointing to FGM and pointing to its place in underpinning misogyny. So again, just your thoughts about it, and also as people talk about it here, the silence that surrounds the violence that women and girls are facing, how all too often they're not speaking out because they're pressured by family or the sense of victim shaming. Speak to that, Nwazi.
Aisha, I'll start with the silence. Our president last week, in marking the 100th day of our coronavirus lockdown in this country, spent a great part of his address to the nation speaking about the crisis really of gender-based violence in this country, and speaking to some of the interventions that we are seeing that our government has begun to put in place to try and resolve this crisis. But he really especially spoke as well about the culture of silence around as it relates to gender-based violence. And there is an incredible book by a Professor Pumla Gola called Rape, a South African Nightmare, and she speaks about the female fear factory and about how essentially society works to create these heightened levels of fear amongst women that keep us silent about this. And it's cultural norms and understandings of who you are as a human being within the hierarchy, and the fact that this kind of thing for a very long time did not matter, and in fact would adversely affect your value as a human being or as a woman if your value is attached to your purity, your virginity, your rapeability, and which bodies are able to be discarded in our society. And just in terms of the female genital mutilation, it's not an issue at all in South Africa. But I will say, outside of the fact that it's obviously horrifying for me to read the stories, I don't think that that means that my country is any better in terms of the misogynoir, really, and the misogyny that is specifically directed at Black women's bodies via our cultural system, and the way that it's strengthened and reproduced by things that are then referred to as culture or traditional systems that are supposed to be inherently sacrosanct, and almost untouchable and holy cows in this country.
So well said, Ambra.
Aisha, I wanted to just touch upon one thing, specifically around the culture of silence as well. I mean, and for yourself being a journalist, both of you actually, you could really also, lend some insight into this. But for what we see in Ghana, there is this, the media plays a really huge role in perpetuating, this almost this culture of silence, and the way that we handle these cases, these sensitive cases of sexual and gender-based violence, whether it's child abuse, whether it's sexual assault or rape, whether it's domestic violence. We have women who decide to come forward and use the systems that are in place to report their cases, etc. And the media may pick up on these cases. And what we find is that, yes, we want to be able to work within institutions and with institutions to be able to bring perpetrators to book and to be able to, send the message and disseminate the message that, yes, this is wrong. But the way that sometimes the victims are also treated in the media, in our cultural settings, is something that really feeds into this culture of silence as well. You have a woman who will come in and, report a case, or a young child. A better example is a young child that has been defiled, and their name is being exposed, or their pictures of the defilement are being exposed, and it's almost voyeuristic in a way. And there is this, and so it almost reinforces this culture of silence, because you have family units, and I've seen this in the work that I've done, where it's like, no, we don't want that kind of attention. You've been defiled by your uncle or your brother or the guy next door in the community, and we can be shamed because it's going to go everywhere. And so this culture of silence is being perpetuated at sort of all different levels.
Yeah.
And so I think that
No, I just want to throw in some comments that are coming in, because they're coming in thick and fast, and I know that you to weave into what you're saying. This comment coming in saying from Matilda J. Cole, and the biggest promoters of the silence are women. Would you agree with that? And Zainab Bangura also saying that the way these cases are treated and that the way the survivors are treated is, it becomes about, never the men not question why, but it's always about the women, how you look or you address, or why were you present there in the first place?
I think it would be extremely dishonest to pretend as though women do not contribute to rape culture in this country, on the continent, and globally in general. And I think that we must remember that women and men are still socialized in exactly the same societies that produce these violent men. And so there are certain gender roles that are imagined, and certain boxes that have been created for women in society. And there are some women who thrive within those boxes, or maybe even are not thriving, but I have not been able to unlearn what society tells them about who they should be and womanhood. There is, in South Africa, there's a phenomenon called ugyalwa, when a woman is getting married. And we always talk about how the older women will tell you to begezela throughout the difficulties of the marriage, which speaks to, just staying the distance, essentially, regardless of abuse. And whatever it is that you experience in that marriage. So it's those kinds of cultural norms. There's the idea that a woman should not be able to come back from a marriage and come back home, regardless of whether or not they are being abused within that marriage. And so definitely these cultural norms are, to a certain extent, upheld by older women and by women in society. And I think that it is important for us to have that conversation amongst ourselves as women about how harmful it is, how harmful these cultural norms are. But I always, when I have that conversation, really just want to emphasize how important the role of men is. Because whilst women are upholding patriarchal structures, women are not the ones that are, enacting these levels of violence against other human beings. Perpetrators are mostly men. They're the ones who are raping people, women and children, and killing women and children. And as much as we do need to direct messaging towards women, I do think that our focus absolutely needs to be in engaging men in conversations around violence in this country and on the continent.
Before I go any further, I want to read this comment posted by Andrik Jallo. She says, they insulted and called me names when I broke the silence after years of sexual violence, which really does speak to the difficult. And Andrik, thank you for being willing to share that, and to everybody who is writing in. But Andrik, thank you. I mean, that's the reality, right? That survivors can face, and all too often are facing, that they are shamed into silence, and when they do speak, they're insulted and re-traumatized all over again. I don't want to run out of time and not ask you both, how do we fix this? How do we fix this? Amber, to you first.
This is a question, and it's a great question. It's a question that's often asked. One of the things that I am a proponent of, having consulted with governments and with, UN agencies, but being an activist myself, I truly believe in the idea of participatory governance. We really need to become much more engaged. And activism really is not just going in the streets and protesting, but it's really going out there. And it's the same thing with every injustice. We're seeing the same thing in the States right now, and people are saying, go out there and vote. We need to do this in our communities as well. And it's not just voting, but it's real participatory governance. If it's affirmative action, in our country, for example, right now we're putting forth, in Ghana, we're putting forth an affirmative action bill to be able to increase the level of municipal participation, so MPs in government, to be able to speak to the issues of women. We need to be able to have legislature, law that speaks to the issue of violence against women and all injustices against women. We have things called participatory gender budgeting, where budgets that are presented in Parliament, for example, need to have a certain percentage, a gender lens. And that is very important, because these are the things that are going to, and really and truly, it's money. We need to be able to say, okay, what are we doing? How are we supporting victims of violence? Do we have safe houses? Do we have government instituted policies that are able to support our victims? So it really begins with participatory governance. And I would implore every single individual listening at this time to really take onus and say, yes, I am going to hold my government accountable. I was really touched, and that you read the letter of response, Isha, from the minister. I love the fact that you reached out to her, not only just once, but twice, because it's at that level where we need these responses. We need to hold our governments accountable. We need to be able to say, if you're going to sign on to the Beijing Platform of Action, if you're going to ratify all of these sort of at the global level, all of these really great things, what are you doing at home? And we really need to, and it's not just when a young girl is raped, it's not just when a young girl is killed or brutally murdered in a church, which is horrendous, but it's every single day. And these are the reforms and these are the changes that we need to make.
Absolutely. No, I think last word to you.
I think that to fix it, we need planning, we need strategy, we need political will, and absolutely need money and funding. And I think that I do believe that South Africa is on the correct path. Our National Strategic Plan Against Gender-Based Violence and Femicide has been adopted as the official government policy position to tackle gender-based violence in this country. It has 6 very strong pillars that speak to what the government and our leaders specifically should be required to do. That's the first pillar. The second pillar speaks to prevention programs, and part of the conversation that I had with you the last time I was on, Isha, around workshopping around masculinities, toxic masculinities, womanhood and gender. It also speaks to the justice system and really tries to close the gaps that we see in our criminal justice system as it pertains to gender-based violence. So part of also what I mentioned with women dying with protection orders in their hands, how is it that you really go beyond the spirit of the law and ensure that the law is accessible, but also does the job that it's supposed to do in terms of keeping women, safe. And it looks at, the kind of funding that we need for these kinds of interventions. And our president has promised us 1.6 billion rand alone in this year, which is about $92 million. And I do hope that that money comes through. It speaks, the six pillars also speak to the economic power that women need to have, because financial abuse goes hand in hand with physical abuse, goes hand in hand with emotional abuse, goes hand in hand with the abuse of children as well. So how is it that we ensure that women are empowered economically to be able to exercise the agency that is their basic human right? And I think that these kinds of ideas, and I mean, this national strategic plan that we have in this country came from activists, came from women, came from activist organizations after, the women in this country in 2018 took to the streets and essentially said that enough is enough. And I am very encouraged by the fact that this national strategic plan is the government response. I would encourage anyone who is watching us to perhaps take a look at it and see if there are some things there that could be able to help, any other country on the continent, because this continent is a hostile place for women and children, and we absolutely have to do something about it as a matter of urgency. It cannot be, Aisha, that I'm on your show in 2 years' time having exactly the same conversation. We cannot afford it.
No,
Yeah,
we can't.
we can't allow for it. Nwazi Tasini, Amra Iranki, thank you for raising your voices and for being part of this conversation. A critical conversation needed at an urgent time. Thank you. We're going to keep the conversation going, and and again, like you said, we're calling for change. We're calling for investment. We're going to hold our governments accountable. We're calling for men to be part of the solution, and we're calling for an end to victim shaming and support for survivors. We're going to keep this conversation going. Thank you so much. We must leave it there for today. Please be safe, women. Ladies, my mind scrambled just with the scale of all of this. Thank you, ladies.
Yes. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's incredibly painful subject matter to tackle, but as difficult as it is, we absolutely must have these hard conversations. We absolutely must stare the ugliness in the face and set our intentions to change our cultures, to break down our systems that are failing us, and to put the victims and survivors at the center, and to hold those accountable who are systematically, repeatedly sexualizing and brutalizing women and girls. You heard Nwazi say that. It is not a safe place to be in Africa. As a woman, as a child in Africa, you are unsafe. And we demand our safety, and we demand protection from our governments, and we will hold you accountable for that. We must leave it there today. It's an important conversation. It is way past time for the change, way past time for the change. The time is now. We want the change now. And we're going to commit ourselves here on Home with Isha Sesay to these conversations, to covering the story in a consistent way. So this isn't the last of it. We will stay with the story. A quick scheduling note to let you know, we are reorganizing our programming. So starting from next week, we are going to be live Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We are shifting times as well. So just very briefly to tell you, on Wednesdays, if you've been watching the show, it's Deep Dive Wednesday, when we bring an expert and we really spend an hour looking at an issue, looking at a topic or a headline. We're going live now, moving up in the day so more people can watch, so it's not so late for you across the continent. You see the times there on your screen, basically 5 p.m. GMT and so forth on the continent. For us in the US, 9 a.m. on the West Coast where I am, 12 p.m. if you're on the East Coast. Again, so So actually now I'm being told, look at the screen, just follow the graphic on the screen and where we're going in terms of time. But we'll be live now Wednesday with Deep Dive Wednesday, and the full edition of the show will be happening on Thursday, same new time, and then on Fridays you can catch my IG live series on Instagram Live. Again, all the times are on your screens. I don't want to misspeak. 10 a.m. 1 p.m., 5 p.m. Those are the times on your screen, and that's where we're shifting to starting from next week. It's been a difficult hour, but I want to say thank you to everyone who stayed with me, everyone who was part of the conversation. Thank you. As someone said there, as Alimatu Dimonkene said, change has begun. Yes, it has. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Bye for now.